My name is Corey, and at 67 years old, I never thought I would start over. After losing Martha, my wife of 45 years, I moved in with my son Robert and his wife Stephanie. What followed were years of humiliation, culminating when Stephanie slapped me to the ground for asking to borrow $100. They had no idea I was worth $5 million or that I owned the house they lived in. If you've ever felt disrespected by family, take a moment to subscribe while I share how I reclaimed my dignity and taught my ungrateful children the true value of family. I grew up in rural Nebraska, the son of a farmer who believed hard work built character. By the time I was 14, I was already helping my father with construction jobs around the county. We never had much, but we had enough. Dad always said, "Corey, a man who works hard and treats people right will never go hungry." Those words shaped my entire life. After high school, I managed to get into a state college on partial scholarship, working evenings and weekends to pay the rest. That's where I met Martha Johnson, a beautiful education major with the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. Our first date was at a coffee shop where I could only afford 2 cups of black coffee. She never complained. Instead, she brought homemade cookies she'd baked that morning. We married right after graduation in a small ceremony with just family and close friends. Nothing fancy, but filled with love. Martha got a job teaching elementary school, while I started working for a local construction company. Those early years were tough financially, but rich in everything that mattered. We rented a tiny apartment, saved every penny, and dreamed of building something of our own someday. 4 years into our marriage, Martha gave birth to our only child, Robert. The moment I held him, I promised I'd give him opportunities I never had, but also teach him the value of hard work. Martha and I agreed we wouldn't spoil him. We wanted him to understand that nothing worthwhile comes easy. By the time I turned 30, I had learned enough about the construction business to start my own company. Corey's construction began with just me, 1 truck, and more determination than capital. Martha kept teaching to ensure we had steady income while the business grew. Slowly, job by job, our reputation spread. I never cut corners, always delivered on time, and treated both clients and employees with respect. As Robert grew, he spent summers working with my crew. I started him at the bottom, hauling materials and cleaning up job sites. Some of my employees thought I was too hard on him, but Martha understood. "We're raising a man," she would say, "not a pampered prince." Robert was a good student, bright and ambitious. When he was accepted to an expensive private university, Martha and I were proud but worried about how to pay for it. By then, my business was doing well, but 4 years of private tuition would still be a stretch. We sat Robert down and explained we would pay for his education, but he would need to maintain good grades and work summers. During those college years, our family traditions remained strong. Sunday dinners were mandatory, with phones turned off and conversations about everything from politics to philosophy. Martha made sure we said what we meant and listened to each other. Those dinner conversations were where Robert developed his critical thinking skills. Meanwhile, my business continued to grow. We expanded from residential to commercial construction, winning contracts for shopping centers and office buildings. I reinvested most profits back into the company but started putting away significant savings. Martha and I lived well below our means, driving practical cars and staying in the same comfortable but modest house we'd bought when Robert was 10. What no one knew, not even Robert, was that Martha and I had become quite wealthy. Through disciplined saving and smart investments guided by a trusted financial advisor, our net worth had grown to almost $5 million by the time Robert graduated college. We owned our main home outright, plus a lakeside cabin in Minnesota and a small vacation condo in Florida. All properties remained in our names, a decision that would prove crucial years later. After college, Robert took a job with a marketing firm in the city, about 30 miles from our home. We were proud when he was quickly promoted, though we noticed he started developing expensive tastes. His clothes, car, and apartment were all high-end. Martha worried he was spending beyond his means, but I reminded her that young people often go through a phase of materialism before settling down. Then Robert met Stephanie at a corporate event. She was striking, confident, and worked in the sales department of a luxury car dealership. The first time they brought her to dinner, I noticed how her eyes lingered on our modest furnishings. Martha, always perceptive, later whispered, "Did you see how she kept checking her watch during dinner? As if she had somewhere better to be." Still, we welcomed Stephanie and tried to get to know her. She was charming when she wanted to be, especially around Robert. Their whirlwind romance moved quickly, and within 6 months, they were engaged. When they announced their plans for an extravagant wedding, Martha and I exchanged glances but agreed to help financially. We ended up paying $75,000 for a wedding that seemed designed to impress rather than celebrate. The first real red flag came during the wedding planning, when Stephanie referred to our home as quaint and retro, but not in a good way within earshot. Later, as we were showing wedding photos to family friends, she commented, "We really need to get you two to upgrade your living situation. This house screams 1980s. Martha defended our home graciously. "This house has sheltered us through all of life's storms. Every scratch and worn spot tells a story of our family." Stephanie smiled tightly and changed the subject. That night, Martha told me privately, "That girl measures value in dollar signs, not memories." I worry for Robert. Little did we know how prophetic those words would become. After the wedding, Robert and Stephanie bought a house in an upscale neighborhood they clearly couldn't afford on their salaries alone. They frequently mentioned being house poor but continued spending on luxury items. When they visited, Stephanie would subtly comment on how outdated our lifestyle was, from our furniture to our vacation choices. I remember Martha saying, "Someday they'll learn that happiness doesn't come from what you own, but from who you are." We continued to live by that principle, quietly building wealth while appearing to be comfortable, but not rich. This deliberate modesty would eventually become our greatest protection. Our world shattered on an ordinary Tuesday in April. Martha had been feeling unusually tired and had lost some weight. We assumed it was just stress from her school administration job. The doctor's appointment was meant to be routine, perhaps resulting in vitamins or rest recommendations. Instead, we received devastating news. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, advanced, aggressive. The oncologist spoke gently but honestly. "We're looking at approximately 8 months, maybe a year with treatment." Martha squeezed my hand so hard her knuckles turned white, but her voice remained steady. "What are our options?" That was Martha, always practical, always brave. The drive home passed in silence. Only when we were sitting at our kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared thousands of meals, did Martha allow herself to cry. I held her for hours, our tears mingling as we faced the unthinkable. We decided to tell Robert in person. When he and Stephanie arrived that weekend, Martha insisted on cooking dinner despite my protests. "I'm sick, Corey, not invalid. Let me do this normal thing." Robert broke down at the news. Stephanie held his hand and appeared appropriately somber. After the initial shock, she was the first to speak practically. "You'll need the best treatment available. There's a renowned cancer center in Houston. We should look into getting you there." Martha thanked her but explained she preferred to stay with her longtime doctors. "I trust them, and I want to be home, surrounded by friends and family, not alone in a strange city." Over the following weeks, the family pulled together. Robert visited more frequently. Stephanie organized a meal train with neighbors. They seemed genuinely supportive, and I was grateful. Then came the first hint of what lay beneath. 3 weeks after the diagnosis, Stephanie approached me while Martha was napping. "Corey, Robert, and I have been talking. You should consider selling the lake house to pay for experimental treatments. Insurance won't cover everything, and you want to give Martha every chance." I explained that our insurance was excellent, and we had adequate savings for any treatments Martha might need or want. "The properties stay," I said firmly. "They're part of our retirement security." Stephanie's expression hardened momentarily before she plastered on a smile, just trying to help. It's what family does. That conversation marked a turning point. Gradually, Robert began taking Stephanie's side in family discussions. When Martha expressed her wish to spend a weekend at our lake house, Stephanie argued it was too far from medical care. Robert backed her, rather than his mother. As Martha's health declined, she required more assistance. Stephanie volunteered to coordinate her care schedule, but used it to gradually exclude Martha's closest friends. "They tire her out too much," she would say, though Martha repeatedly asked for their visits. One evening, I overheard Robert and Stephanie talking in our kitchen. "Once your mom is gone, we need to convince your dad to sell this place," Stephanie said. "He can't maintain it alone, and frankly, it's a waste of prime real estate." "He's attached to it," Robert replied. "It won't be easy. Trust me. No one wants to be rattling around in a house full of ghosts. He'll be better off in a senior community, or with us, temporarily." Martha's decline accelerated in her 6th month after diagnosis. One night, as I sat by her bedside, she took my hand. "Corey, there's something we need to discuss while I still have clarity." Her voice was weak but determined. She asked me to get a specific folder from her desk. Inside was a detailed accounting of all our assets, just over $5 million between properties, investments, and retirement accounts. "The kids have no idea," she said, "and I think we should keep it that way for now." I was confused. Shouldn't we prepare Robert? Help him understand his inheritance? Martha's eyes, though dimmed by illness, flashed with her old wisdom. "Money reveals character. It doesn't build it. After I'm gone, I want you to test them before revealing anything." "Test them? How?" "Find a way to see if they'll support you when they think you need it. If they show kindness when there's nothing to gain." She squeezed my hand. "Promise me, Corey. Don't give away anything until you know their true hearts." I promised, though at the time I thought her concerns were unnecessary. Robert was our son, raised with our values. Surely he would prove worthy. Martha spent her final weeks making peace with her impending death. We had deep conversations about our life together, reminisced about Robert's childhood, and spoke honestly about our fears and regrets. Despite her physical pain, these were precious days. One unusually warm autumn morning, Martha asked to sit by the window overlooking her garden. "The black-eyed Susans are having a final show," she observed. I held her hand as she watched butterflies moving between flowers. By evening she had slipped into unconsciousness. By midnight she was gone, my hand still holding hers. The funeral was attended by hundreds from our community. Martha had touched countless lives as a teacher and friend. Stephanie took charge of the arrangements, sometimes overriding my preferences, but always with a smile that suggested she was helping the grieving old man who couldn't cope. A week later, we met with Frank Adams, our attorney and my longtime friend. Following Martha's instructions, he revealed only a portion of our assets to Robert and Stephanie. The family home, a modest life insurance policy, and small investment accounts totaling about $800,000. "That's all?" Stephanie blurted out, then quickly composed herself. "I mean, that's substantial, of course." Frank explained that as Martha's husband, everything would transfer to me first, with Robert as the eventual heir. Stephanie's disappointment was palpable, though she tried to hide it. As we left his office, she linked her arm through mine. "Corey, Robert and I have been talking. We think you should come live with us. That big house will be too much for you alone, and we have plenty of room." Robert nodded encouragingly. "It makes sense, Dad. You can sell the house and use the money for your retirement. We'll take care of you." I looked at my son, wondering if he was genuinely concerned or if this was Stephanie's influence. Either way, their suggestion aligned perfectly with Martha's final request. I would have my test. "Let me think about it," I said, already knowing what my answer would be. The first month living with Robert and Stephanie seemed promising. They gave me the guest bedroom on the main floor, helped move some of my favorite furniture pieces, and included me in their dinner conversations. If Stephanie sometimes sighed when I talked about Martha or old times, I attributed it to normal adjustment difficulties. What I didn't tell them was that I hadn't sold our family home. Instead, I had leased it furnished to a visiting professor for 1 year. Frank had handled the paperwork, ensuring my name remained as owner on all documents. "Just being cautious," I told him, though Martha's words about testing their character lingered in my mind. Around week 5, Stephanie mentioned they needed to convert the home office to a nursery. "We're not pregnant yet, but we're planning," she explained. "The guest room would make a perfect office. But don't worry, the basement has a nice bedroom. It's a bit small, but you don't need much space, right?" That weekend, Robert helped move my belongings to the basement. The room was indeed small, with just one narrow window near the ceiling. My antique dresser wouldn't fit, so it went into their storage. My reading chair was deemed too bulky for the space, so it too disappeared. By Sunday evening, my living space had shrunk to a twin bed, small nightstand, and metal folding chair. "It's cozy," Robert said, not meeting my eyes, "and you'll be more comfortable down here. No stairs to worry about." There were, of course, stairs to reach the main floor, but I didn't point this out. Thanksgiving arrived, our first major holiday without Martha. For decades, our home had been the gathering place for extended family and friends. I'd assumed we would continue this tradition at Robert and Stephanie's house, and invited several of our oldest friends. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Stephanie approached me. About the guest list. "We need to make some changes." She explained that the house couldn't accommodate so many elderly people, and that they'd decided to invite their work colleagues instead. "It's important for Robert's career." When I protested, she smiled condescendingly. "Times change, Corey. We need to build our network, not cling to the past. You can call your friends and explain, can't you?" Having to uninvite people who had been like family for 40 years was humiliating. One friend, Tom, who had known Robert since birth, asked directly, "Is everything okay there, Corey? This doesn't sound like the boy we know." That night, I tried talking to Robert. "Son, those people are like family. Your mother would have wanted them there." For a moment, genuine conflict crossed his face. Then he hardened. "Mom's gone, Dad. Stephanie and I are building our lives now. You need to adjust." His words stung more than he could know. This was the son we had raised to value loyalty and respect. The Thanksgiving gathering proved even worse than anticipated. I was seated at the far end of the table with people I barely knew, while Robert and Stephanie entertained their colleagues. When I tried to share a story about Martha's famous pumpkin pie, Stephanie smoothly interrupted and changed the subject. The following week, I returned from a doctor's appointment to find Stephanie rearranging the living room. Martha's portrait, which had hung prominently, was gone, replaced by an abstract painting. "Where's your mother's picture?" I asked Robert that evening. He looked uncomfortable. Stephanie thought it was bringing down the energy of the room. "It's in the hall closet." "That picture comes out, or I go," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. The portrait returned, but smaller and relegated to the hallway, where guests wouldn't see it. I recognized the message. My preferences were barely tolerated, not respected. December brought more changes. Stephanie announced new house rules over dinner. "We need structure to make this arrangement work," she said, as if speaking to a child, rather than the man who had given them thousands of dollars for their wedding. The rules included restricted kitchen hours to avoid mealtime conflicts, limited television time in the common areas, and a request that I notify them 24 hours before having any visitors. "Not that you have many," she added with a thin smile. Robert sat silently, scrolling through his phone as his wife systematically reduced his father's place in their home. When I caught his eye, he merely shrugged. "It's their house too, Dad," except it wasn't. The down payment for this house had come from money we had given them for their wedding. I had helped Robert with the mortgage application, co-signing when his credit alone wasn't sufficient. These facts, which I kept to myself, made their treatment all the more painful. One afternoon, I overheard Stephanie on the phone with a friend. "The old burden is watching TV again. I swear he does it just to annoy me. No, we can't just put him in a home yet. Robert still has guilt issues, and we haven't sorted out the inheritance stuff. Trust me, I'm working on it." When their first child, Emma, was born the following spring, I thought things might improve. Surely a grandchild would strengthen family bonds. Initially, I was included in the excitement. I spent hours rocking Emma when she was fussy, giving the exhausted new parents a break. Then Stephanie began criticizing how I held the baby, fed her, even how I talked to her. "She doesn't need to hear your old stories," she snapped one day. "And please don't call her Little Martha. She's her own person." I had indeed been calling the baby Little Martha sometimes, seeing echoes of my wife in her expressions. Being denied even this small connection to my late wife felt like losing Martha all over again. As Emma grew, I was increasingly relegated to babysitter status rather than grandfather. I could watch her when they needed a break, but had no say in decisions. When I suggested reducing her screen time, Stephanie rolled her eyes. "Your parenting ideas are from the Stone Age, Corey." My financial situation also became a point of contention. Though I had substantial hidden assets, the accounts Robert knew about showed only my modest pension and Social Security. 3 months after Emma's birth, Stephanie raised the issue of my contribution to the household. "We've calculated the additional utility costs since you moved in," she said, sliding a paper across the table, "plus a fair portion of the groceries and your share of the mortgage. The total exceeded my visible monthly income." When I pointed this out, she smiled. "Well, you should have planned better for retirement, shouldn't you? Maybe you could sell your car. You hardly drive anyway." Robert, bouncing Emma on his knee, added, "It's only fair, Dad. Everyone needs to pull their weight." The irony of this statement, coming from my son who had never wanted for anything his entire life, was almost too much to bear. Still, I wrote the check, drawing from a secret account Frank had helped me establish. This would be part of the test. By the time Emma was walking, my health had begun to suffer. My blood pressure, always normal before, was consistently elevated. I developed insomnia, lying awake listening to the creaks of a house that never felt like home. My doctor, concerned about stress, prescribed medication I struggled to afford given my contributions to Robert and Stephanie's household. "Maybe you should get a part-time job," Stephanie suggested when I mentioned the cost of the prescription. "Lots of seniors work at grocery stores. It would get you out of the house, too." Her tone made clear what went unsaid. Out of their house, out of their way. My world continued to shrink. I was allowed in fewer areas of the house. My belongings mysteriously disappeared during decluttering. Family photos that included me were replaced with artful portraits of Robert, Stephanie, and Emma. One particularly painful incident occurred during a family gathering for Robert's birthday. Stephanie's parents, who visited rarely, were present. Her father, a successful surgeon, spoke constantly of his vacation home and recent luxury cruise. "We'd love to take you all someday," he said. "Family trips create such important memories." "That would be wonderful," Stephanie agreed. "Just the three of us need a getaway." The deliberate exclusion hung in the air. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I caught sight of my reflection. When had I started looking so defeated? Martha would hardly recognize the diminished man I had become. For the first time, I truly understood what she had feared, why she had insisted on the test. That night, in my basement room, I wept for the first time since her funeral. Not just for her absence, but for the son we seemed to have lost as well. Robert's 40th birthday party became the setting for my most public humiliation. Stephanie planned an elaborate garden party at their house, inviting Robert's colleagues, their neighbors, and her extensive social circle. The guest list notably excluded my few remaining friends. The day before, Stephanie informed me of my role. "We need someone to help the caterers and manage the gift table. You don't really know most of the guests anyway." I nodded, past the point of arguing. My role had been clear for some time. I was the helpful ghost, present to serve but not to participate. The party itself was ostentatious. Stephanie had hired a string quartet, ordered custom cocktails, and arranged for a professional photographer. The backyard was transformed with rented furniture and elaborate floral arrangements. Looking around, I calculated they had spent at least $15,000 on a single afternoon's entertainment. As guests arrived, I stood near the caterers, helping direct them as needed. Several people looked at me curiously, clearly wondering who the elderly man in the corner might be. Finally, one of Robert's coworkers approached and introduced himself. "I'm Jim, from the marketing department. Are you with the catering company?" Before I could answer, Stephanie appeared. "Jim, so glad you could come." She glanced at me, then added, "This is Robert's dad. He lives with us now. Since his wife passed, you know." The way she said it made clear the arrangement was charity on their part. Jim looked uncomfortable, murmured something polite, and moved away. Stephanie gave me a tight smile. "The caterers need help in the kitchen," she said, effectively dismissing me. During dinner, I was seated at the furthest table, with the teenage babysitter hired for the children and an elderly aunt of Stephanie's who was hard of hearing. From this distance, I watched my son accepting gifts and congratulations, never once acknowledging my presence or our shared history. The man celebrating 40 years of life seemed like a stranger, not the boy Martha and I had raised. Midway through the meal, Emma ran over to my table, excited to show me a flower she had picked. As she climbed onto my lap, my elbow accidentally knocked over a glass of red wine, which spilled across the white tablecloth. The small accident might have passed unnoticed, except Stephanie happened to be walking by. She gasped dramatically, drawing everyone's attention. "Seriously? The one thing you had to do was not make a mess." The conversation around us died. Dozens of eyes turned our way. Emma began to cry, sensing trouble. Stephanie snatched her from my lap. "This is why we can't have nice things around you. You're just not careful anymore." The public scolding, delivered in the same tone one might use with a disobedient toddler, burned through me. I felt my face flush with shame as I tried to blot the spill with my napkin. "Just leave it," Stephanie snapped. "You're making it worse." I looked to Robert, standing just behind his wife. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the son I knew, but he simply took Emma from Stephanie's arms, turned away, and rejoined his guests, leaving me to sit at the stained table alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The humiliation replayed in my mind, alongside Martha's words. Test them before revealing anything. Over the past year and a half, I had collected plenty of evidence about Stephanie's character, but I had been making excuses for Robert. Perhaps it was time for a more direct test. The following week, I formulated a plan. I scheduled a genuine doctor's appointment, making sure to mention it to both Robert and Stephanie. Afterward, I returned, looking concerned. When Stephanie reluctantly asked what the doctor had said, I seized the opportunity. "Nothing serious," I assured them. "Just need to adjust my blood pressure medication. The new prescription is a little expensive, though." "How expensive?" Robert asked. "About $100. My insurance doesn't cover this particular one. I'll have to wait until my Social Security check comes next week." "Can't you use a generic?" Stephanie asked, not looking up from her phone. "The doctor specifically recommended this one, but it's fine. I can wait." I let the subject drop, but the following morning, as Robert was leaving for work, I approached him privately. "Son, I hate to ask, but could I borrow $100 for that prescription? Just until my check comes." He hesitated. "I'd need to check with Stephanie about that. We're on a tight budget with Emma's preschool payments." The preschool he mentioned cost $2,000 a month, an extravagance they had chosen over many more affordable options. Still, I nodded understandingly. That evening, I was reading to Emma when Stephanie came home from her yoga class. After putting Emma to bed, I approached Stephanie in the kitchen. "Robert mentioned he talked to you about the loan for my prescription. I just need it for a few days." Her reaction was immediate and volcanic. She slammed her water bottle onto the counter. "Are you kidding me right now? We give you a place to live, food to eat, and now you want cash too?" "It's just a loan," I said quietly. "For medicine. We're not your personal bank." Her voice rose sharply. "Do you have any idea how expensive it is carrying you? Robert works 60 hours a week to maintain this lifestyle, and you just take. I stood my ground. "I contribute what I can. This is for health reasons." What happened next shocked even me, who had witnessed her building contempt for months. Stephanie stepped forward and slapped me hard across the face. The force of the blow, coupled with my poor balance, sent me stumbling backward until I fell against the refrigerator and slid to the floor. "Go work, old parasite," she screamed. "We're tired of carrying you." Robert, hearing the commotion, rushed in. He saw me on the floor, holding my stinging cheek, his wife standing over me in rage. For one moment, I thought he would finally defend me. Instead, he helped me to my feet with clinical detachment and said, "Let's all calm down. Dad, you should go to your room while Stephanie cools off." Not, "Are you hurt?" Not, "That was unacceptable." Just a suggestion that I disappear while his wife's anger passed, as if I were the source of the problem rather than the victim of assault. I retreated to my basement room, locked the door, and sat on my bed trembling. My cheek throbbed where she had struck me. More painful was the realization that my son had witnessed his father being struck and chosen to side with the attacker. From my nightstand drawer, I took out the small framed photo of Martha I kept hidden there. "You were right," I whispered to her image. "They failed the test completely." I spent that night making plans, a sense of clarity cutting through months of fog. The time for tests was over. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter, one where I reclaimed the dignity my wife would have insisted I defend. The morning after the slap, I examined my face in the tiny bathroom mirror. A distinct bruise had formed on my cheekbone, the skin slightly split where Stephanie's ring had connected. I took several photos with my phone, capturing the injury from different angles. These would be my first pieces of evidence. I left early, before Robert and Stephanie were awake, leaving a note that I was going to the senior center. In truth, I drove to Frank Adams's office. Frank had been my attorney for 30 years and one of my closest friends. He had handled Martha's will and knew the full extent of our assets. When his assistant showed me in, Frank's eyes widened at the sight of my face. "Good God, Corey, what happened?" I told him everything, starting with Martha's request to test our son and daughter-in-law, through the gradual erosion of my dignity, to the final humiliating slap. As I spoke, Frank's expression shifted from shock to cold anger. "Show me those photos," he said. When I did, he immediately saved them to his secure server. "This is assault, Corey. We could press charges." "I'm not interested in legal revenge," I explained. "But I am done with the charade. Martha was right about them, and it's time I acted on that knowledge." Frank nodded grimly. "What do you want to do?" Over the next 3 hours, we formulated a comprehensive plan. First, Frank pulled up all property records, confirming that Robert and Stephanie had no legal claim to my house, which they still believed I had sold. The home they lived in was technically in Robert's name, but I was still a co-signer on the mortgage, giving me certain rights. "There's something else you should know," Frank said, checking his computer. "Someone has been searching property records in your name, multiple searches over the past 2 months. Robert? The searches came from his office IP address. So they had been investigating my assets, perhaps looking for hidden value, even while treating me like a burden. This confirmed my decision was the right one. Next, we reviewed all financial accounts. The bulk of our wealth was in investment accounts under my name only. There were education trusts for Emma that Robert couldn't access until she reached college age. Everything was legally secure. "What about the house they're living in?" I asked. "You're a co-signer, which means you have certain rights, but you don't own it outright. However," Frank tapped his chin thoughtfully, "there are other approaches we could take." He explained that as a co-signer who had contributed significantly to the down payment, I could petition for a forced sale if I claimed financial duress. Given my documented contributions to their household exceeding my visible income, I had a strong case. "It would take time through the courts, though," Frank warned. "I may have a faster solution," I replied, an idea forming. "Can you connect me with a real estate agent? Someone discreet and efficient?" By noon, we had brought in Janet Zhao, a real estate agent Frank had worked with previously. I explained my situation in general terms, then got to my request. "I need to know what would happen if Robert decided to sell his house quickly. What's the fastest timeline, and what would be the financial impact?" Janet considered this. "In the current market, a house in that neighborhood could sell within days if priced aggressively. Maybe 10 to 15% below market value for an all-cash, quick-close deal. I have several investors who look specifically for such opportunities. And if the seller wasn't directly involved?" if a co-signer with appropriate documentation was handling the transaction. She glanced at Frank, who nodded that this was a legitimate question. With proper power of attorney documentation, it's possible. Unusual, but legal with the right paperwork. By the time I left Frank's office, we had set several plans in motion. First, Frank would prepare power of attorney documents based on my co-signer status and financial contributions. Second, Janet would quietly prepare market analysis for Robert's house and identify potential cash buyers. Third, we would secure my assets further, ensuring Robert could not access anything if he retaliated. I returned to Robert and Stephanie's house mid-afternoon. Neither mentioned my bruised face. In fact, they barely acknowledged my presence, which suited my purposes perfectly. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved forward methodically. I located and secured all important documents and irreplaceable mementos, gradually moving them to a small storage unit I rented under a LLC Frank created. Family photos, Martha's jewelry, our marriage certificate, and other treasures were safely removed from the house. Meanwhile, I began searching for a new place to live. I found a modest but elegant condo across town, in a secure building with good amenities. I purchased it outright through the LLC, ensuring my name wouldn't appear on public records Robert might search. With Frank's help, I also established a charitable foundation in Martha's name, dedicated to supporting domestic violence, survivors, and elderly citizens facing family estrangement. I transferred a significant portion of our assets to this foundation, with myself as the primary director. The irony that my own son had created the conditions that inspired such a foundation was not lost on me. I revised my will, leaving Robert a nominal sum of $25,000, contingent upon completion of 100 hours of community service at an elder care facility. The bulk of my estate would be divided between Emma's education trust and Martha's foundation. Stephanie would receive nothing. Throughout this period, I maintained my role as the docile, defeated old man. I followed their house rules, contributed my excessive payments, and avoided conflict. The only change in my behavior was spending more time away from the house, which they hardly noticed. Then came the opportunity I had been waiting for. Robert announced they had booked a 10-day vacation to the Bahamas, a much-needed break from their stressful lives. The trip would include a stay at an exclusive resort costing over $12,000. They had arranged for Emma to stay with Stephanie's parents. "Will you be okay alone for 10 days?" Robert asked, his tone suggesting concern, but his eyes already moved on to his packing list. "I'll be fine," I assured him. "Don't worry about me." 3 days before their departure, I confirmed all details with Frank. Janet had found a cash buyer willing to pay 12% below market value for Robert's house with a 3-day closing period. All necessary paperwork was prepared, requiring only my signature once Robert and Stephanie were gone. I also arranged help from Tom, my old friend who had been uninvited from Thanksgiving, and several other friends who understood parts of my situation. They would help move my remaining belongings from the basement room once the house was legally sold. The final piece of preparation was technology. With Frank's guidance on legality, I purchased small, unobtrusive cameras to install near the front door and driveway of Robert's house. These would activate with motion and send footage to my phone. I wanted to capture their reaction when they returned from paradise, to find their world changed, just as they had changed mine. The night before they left, Stephanie issued her usual list of instructions, including not using their expensive kitchen appliances and remembering to take out the trash. As she spoke, I felt a strange calm. The old anxiety and shame had been replaced by certainty. Martha would approve of what I was about to do. When they drove away the next morning, Emma waving from the back seat, I allowed myself one moment of sadness for the grandson relationship that would inevitably be damaged. Then I got to work. The test was complete, and now came the consequences. As Robert's car disappeared down the street, I pulled out my phone and texted Frank. Operation Dignity is a go. Within the hour, he arrived with the final paperwork needed for the house sale. Janet, our real estate agent, had arranged for the cash buyers to view the property that afternoon, while I would be conveniently away having lunch with an old friend. Before leaving, I walked through the house one last time. This wasn't my home with Martha, but it contained the last chapter of our son's connection to our values. In the master bedroom, I noticed a framed photo of Robert's college graduation. Martha and I stood on either side of him, our faces radiant with pride. Strangely, this photo had survived Stephanie's purges. I left it where it was, a final reminder of what they had thrown away. The buyers, a young professional couple relocating for work, loved the house and agreed to Janet's terms immediately. By evening, we had a signed offer with a 3-day closing period and substantial earnest money already in escrow. The couple explained they had been searching for months and were willing to pay a premium for such a quick closing. "They have no idea they're actually getting a discount," Janet whispered to me as they left. In this market, even with the quick sale reduction, that house would normally go for $30,000 more. That night, I slept in Robert's house for the last time. In the morning, Tom and 3 other friends arrived with a small moving truck. Within 2 hours, my meager remaining possessions were loaded and transported to my new condo. I left the basement room exactly as I had found it, even replacing the light bulb that had burned out months ago and that no one had bothered to change. Over the next 2 days, I worked with Frank to complete the sale transaction. Using the power of attorney documentation and my co-signer rights, we processed all necessary paperwork. The buyer's loan was pre-approved, and with an all-cash down payment, the usual delays were avoided. 3 days after Robert and Stephanie left for their vacation, I sat in Frank's office and signed the final documents transferring ownership. The proceeds from the sale would be held temporarily in escrow, with Robert's portion, after my documented contributions were subtracted, eventually transferred to his account. "It's done," Frank said, sliding the paperwork into his file. "The new owners take possession tomorrow." I felt no triumph, only a sense of justice finally being served. "Time for phase 2, I said quietly. We had prepared a detailed letter explaining everything. It outlined my full financial situation, including the $5 million in assets that had been hidden. It detailed the systematic emotional abuse I had endured, including the slap that had left physical evidence. It explained the new allocation of my estate, primarily to Martha's foundation and Emma's education. Finally, it established clear conditions for any potential reconciliation, including family counseling and Stephanie's genuine apology. To this letter, I attached a USB drive containing video clips from the house cameras showing instances of their disrespect, plus photos of my bruised face after Stephanie's assault. Everything was placed in a large envelope and left with their regular mail carrier to be delivered upon their return. According to their itinerary, Robert and Stephanie weren't due back for another 7 days. However, my doorman called on day 4 to inform me that a couple matching their description had tried to gain access to my building, appearing distraught and angry. I checked my phone and found multiple missed calls from Robert, plus increasingly frantic text messages. "Dad, what's going on? Someone's in our house. Call me immediately. Where are you?" Apparently, they had cut their vacation short, perhaps alerted by a neighbor about the moving trucks or new owners. My motion cameras confirmed this, showing their taxi arriving, their shocked faces as they confronted strangers in their home, and their hasty departure with expressions of disbelief. I sent Frank a quick update, then waited. The confrontation was inevitable now, but I would control where and how it happened. 3 hours later, my security cameras showed them arriving at my condo building again. This time, I instructed the doorman to allow them up. I activated the discreet recording system Frank had helped install in my unit, legal in our state with single-party consent. The pounding on my door was so violent I worried they might break it. When I opened it, Stephanie burst in first, her face contorted with rage. Robert followed, looking simultaneously angry and bewildered. "What have you done?" Stephanie screamed. "How dare you sell our house?" I remained perfectly calm. "Please, lower your voice. This is a controlled access building with strict noise policies. Don't you dare tell me to lower my voice. You stole our house. You'll go to jail for this." Robert put a hand on her arm. "Dad, there's been a huge mistake. The people in our house say they bought it. They have paperwork. There's no mistake, I said, sitting down comfortably while they remained standing. I exercised my rights as a co-signer who provided substantial financial support. The house has been legally sold. Your portion of the proceeds, minus my documented contributions, will be transferred to you within 30 days. Robert's face paled. You can't do that. That's our home. Was your home, I corrected. Just as your childhood home was mine until you pressured me to leave it. We were helping you, Stephanie shrieked, stepping toward me with the same aggressive posture she had used before slapping me. I held up my hand. I wouldn't do that again. This conversation is being legally recorded, and another assault would have serious consequences. She froze, suddenly aware of her precarious position. You should have received my letter explaining everything by now, I continued. We came straight here, Robert said, his anger giving way to confusion. Dad, why would you do this? We took you in when Mom died. You took me in, then systematically stripped away my dignity. You moved me to a basement room, took my furniture, excluded my friends, controlled my movements, and extracted excessive financial contributions. Finally, your wife physically assaulted me for asking to borrow $100 for medication. Robert looked at Stephanie sharply. You said he fell. He did fall. After, she caught herself. But too late. After you slapped me so hard I lost my balance. I finished for her. I have photos of the bruising. I also have recordings of your verbal abuse, including calling me an old parasite. Robert sank onto my couch, the reality of the situation finally hitting him. Why didn't you say something? We could have worked this out. I tried many times. You chose to ignore it. But there's something else you should know. I paused, making sure I had their full attention. Your mother and I were worth over $5 million. We owned the family home outright, plus 2 vacation properties and substantial investments. Stephanie's eyes widened in shock. That's impossible, the lawyer said. The lawyer followed our instructions. Martha suspected your character long before she died. She asked me to test you both before revealing our true worth. You failed that test spectacularly. Robert's face crumpled. A test? All of this was a test? The test was simple. Would you show basic human kindness to an elderly parent who appeared to need help? Would you treat me with dignity even when there was nothing material to gain? The answer was clear. Stephanie had been processing the financial information. So, where is all this money now? Secured. Some has gone to establish Martha's foundation for elder dignity. Some is in a trust for Emma's education, which neither of you can access. The rest remains in my control. We're your family, Stephanie said, her voice suddenly gentle, calculating. Surely we can work this out. We've all made mistakes. Interesting that you consider family important now that money is involved, I observed. When you thought I was just a financial burden, you were happy to slap me and call me a parasite. Robert stood up, looking lost. So that's it? You're just cutting us off completely? I handed him a copy of the letter he would find at home. Not completely. There are conditions for reconciliation outlined here. They include therapy, community service, and genuine changes in behavior. Whether you choose to meet them is up to you. Stephanie snatched the letter from Robert's hands, scanning it frantically. Her face flushed with anger again. This is extortion. No, it's a boundary. Something I should have established long ago. I stood, indicating our conversation was ending. You have my contact information. If you choose to meet the conditions in that letter, we can begin rebuilding a relationship. If not, Emma will still be provided for educationally, and you'll receive the small inheritance outlined in my updated will. As they left, Robert turned back once. Dad, whatever he wanted to say died on his lips. Perhaps there was no adequate response to the realization that he had failed not just me, but the values his mother and I had tried to instill. After they departed, my security system showed Stephanie having a complete meltdown in the hallway, screaming obscenities until building security approached them. Robert practically dragged her to the elevator, his own face a mask of shock and dismay. I sat alone in my new home, feeling neither joy nor sorrow, but a quiet sense that Martha would approve. The test was complete, the results clear, and now we would all live with the consequences of our choices. The first week after the confrontation passed in strange silence. I expected angry calls or legal threats, but none came. Frank checked regularly, reporting that Robert had collected their mail, including my detailed letter, but had made no moves to contest the house sale or challenge my decisions. Despite the justice of my actions, I found myself struggling with waves of grief, not just for Martha, whose absence still felt like an open wound, but for the son we had raised and somehow lost. How had our teachings about character and family loyalty failed to take root? Had we been blind to flaws in his nature, or had Stephanie's influence truly transformed him? Tom and my other friends rallied around me. They helped arrange my new condo, joined me for meals to ensure I wasn't eating alone, and provided the emotional support Robert should have offered after Martha's passing. Their kindness emphasized the stark contrast between chosen family and blood relations that had turned toxic. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I received a letter from Robert. Unlike Stephanie's aggressive texts, which I had blocked, his message was subdued. He wrote that they had found temporary housing with Stephanie's parents while looking for a new home. He acknowledged, for the first time, that he had seen Stephanie's treatment of me deteriorating, but had chosen to ignore it to keep the peace. "I failed you and Mom," he wrote. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I understand what I did wrong." The letter seemed sincere, but I had learned caution. I showed it to Frank, who agreed it appeared genuine but advised waiting to see if actions would follow words. "Epiphanies that come with financial consequences can be convenient," he noted. I decided to respond with a brief note acknowledging his letter and reiterating the conditions for rebuilding our relationship. Individual therapy for Robert, joint counseling for us, community service hours at a senior center, and distance from Stephanie until she demonstrated genuine remorse for her behavior. 2 days later, Robert asked to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our homes. I agreed, but asked Tom to accompany me, sitting at a nearby table just in case. When Robert arrived, he looked diminished. The arrogant businessman, replaced by someone older and more uncertain. Our conversation was painfully honest. He admitted being seduced by Stephanie's vision of success and status, gradually adopting her values over those Martha and I had instilled. "She made me feel important," he explained, "like I was rising above my origins." "Your origins," I reminded him quietly, "were a home filled with love, respect, and genuine achievement. Nothing about that needed escaping." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I know that now." We talked for nearly 2 hours. I learned that the marriage was strained even before my intervention. Stephanie's spending had created substantial debt despite their good incomes. She had been pushing Robert to find out more about his potential inheritance for months, frustrated by what she perceived as their financial limitations. When I asked directly if he intended to stay with Stephanie, he hesitated. "I don't know anymore. She's different since all this happened. Angry all the time, blaming me for not knowing about the money. But we have Emma to consider." I thought of my granddaughter, caught in this unhappy situation. Children deserve to see healthy relationships modeled, not toxic ones preserved for their sake. He looked startled, then thoughtful. "You sound like Mom. Your mother was wise. I wish you had valued that more while she was here." The meeting ended with no promises, but a fragile bridge beginning to form. Robert agreed to start therapy the following week and would look into volunteer opportunities at the senior center named in my conditions. True to his word, he began both commitments. His therapist, with Robert's permission, confirmed his attendance and serious engagement with the process. The senior center director reported that he started awkwardly but was developing genuine connections with the residents. Stephanie, meanwhile, attempted a different approach. She hired an attorney to explore challenging the house sale, but quickly discovered the transaction was legally solid. She then tried creating a smear campaign, telling family friends that I had developed dementia and made financially destructive choices. This effort backfired when I provided clear evidence of my mental competence and documentation of her abuse. After 2 months of failed tactics, she finally requested a meeting through her own attorney. I agreed, with Frank present. Her proposal was straightforward: a financial settlement in exchange for moving forward positively as a family. "Mrs. Wilson," Frank responded formally, "Mr. Patterson isn't interested in purchasing family harmony. His conditions for reconciliation involve behavior changes and genuine remorse, not financial transactions." Her mask of contrition slipped. "He's punishing us for treating him exactly how most children treat elderly parents. Ask anyone with aging parents living with them. It's not easy or pretty." "That may be how some people treat their parents," I said, finding my voice. "But it's not how human beings should treat each other, regardless of age or relation. And it's certainly not how Martha and I raised our son to behave." She left in anger, and within the week, I learned from Robert that she had moved out, taking Emma to her parents' home while filing for legal separation. While I took no joy in their marital troubles, I recognized it as a potentially positive step for Robert's recovery of his true self. As months passed, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I began volunteering at a veterans center, finding purpose in helping other men my age navigate health systems and benefits. I joined a grief support group, finally properly processing Martha's loss after the distractions of the family drama. New friendships developed, particularly with Alice, a widow in my building whose husband had passed around the same time as Martha. We shared meals, attended concerts, and found comfort in comparing notes on adjusting to solitary life after decades of partnership. Unlike Stephanie's transactional approach to relationships, Alice valued genuine connection. We understood each other's need to honor our departed spouses while still finding joy in our remaining years. My health improved dramatically once removed from the toxic environment. Blood pressure normalized, sleep improved, and even the persistent back pain that had developed in the basement bedroom gradually subsided. My doctor remarked that I seemed years younger at my annual physical. Robert continued his therapy and volunteer work, even after fulfilling the required hours. We established a cautious new relationship, meeting weekly for lunch, sometimes with Emma joining us in the park afterward. He had moved to a small apartment near his office and was learning to live within a reasonable budget for perhaps the first time in his adult life. 6 months after our confrontation, he filed for divorce. Stephanie fought viciously, demanding half of any inheritance he might receive from me. When informed there would be no substantial inheritance unless he completed all reconciliation conditions, she finally agreed to a settlement focused primarily on Emma's support. Through Martha's foundation, I established a scholarship for nursing students specializing in hospice care, honoring the compassionate professionals who had helped during her final days. The foundation also created a legal aid service for elderly individuals facing family exploitation, turning my painful experience into protection for others. 1 year after selling Robert and Stephanie's house, I invited him to my condo for dinner, the first time he'd been there since our confrontation. I prepared Martha's famous pot roast recipe, and we ate at a table set with her cherished dishes, rescued from storage. "Do you think Mom would be proud of where we are now?" he asked as we finished the meal. I considered this carefully. "She would be proud of your efforts to make amends. She would be pleased we found our way back to each other. But mostly, she would be relieved that her intuition about testing character before revealing wealth was correct. She always could see things the rest of us missed," he acknowledged. "Your mother understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars," I told him, "but in how you're treated by those who claim to love you. That's the inheritance she most wanted to leave you, more valuable than any amount of money." As we cleared the dishes together, I reflected on the painful journey we had traveled. The humiliation and betrayal had been necessary catalysts for truth and eventual healing. Standing up for myself hadn't been about revenge, but about honoring Martha's wisdom and reclaiming the dignity every human deserves, regardless of age. I still keep Martha's photo by my bedside, but now it brings comfort rather than pain. Sometimes I imagine her nodding approval at how I finally found the courage to demand respect, even from family. especially from family. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who weren't treating you right? It takes tremendous courage to establish boundaries with those we love. If my story resonated with you, please share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family challenges and personal growth, and hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of age or circumstance. Thank you for listening, and remember that it's never too late to reclaim your self-respect.